Welcome to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. I'm your host, Guru Nishan. I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast and for sharing it as well. Please do rate and review. And if you'd like to donate to the ongoing support of the podcast, please go to gurunishan.com/uncomfortable conversations. I read the intentions for why I started this podcast at the beginning of every episode. Number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, were born and raised into it, and or who have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural appropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and the overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and lightwashing mentality. Number nine, to honor all the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each and every body that has come through this community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, to process their own emotions, to get somatic therapy and other therapy and support as needed, to draw your own conclusions, and to be critical thinkers rather than to just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters, and please share it when you're ready. We're here to listen and to support you. I want to welcome today's guest to the podcast. Her name is Jules Hartley. She joined 3HO in 2011, changed her name to Amrita Kaur, and actively participated as a Kundalini Yoga teacher, worked for White Tantric Yoga, Health and Humanology, Golden Bridge Yoga, Nine Treasures Yoga, and performed work exchange for KRI and 3HO, and did seva at the Rama Institute, as well as the Guru Ramdas Ashram in Los Angeles through the end of 2018. She grew up in San Diego and Northern Virginia, and then went to college in New York City, where she began her career as an actress and producer in the film and TV industry. Upon the suggestion of her manager at the time, she moved to Hollywood, where she lived for over a decade, much of which was defined by her life in 3HO, serving the community. She has lived back in San Diego since leaving LA in 2018 and is currently finishing up her fourth-year rotations and classes of medical school. A second career in naturopathic medicine has given her a fresh perspective and the chance at a new start in life since leaving the 3HO cult. Jules Hartley, I want to welcome you and thank you for coming on the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast.
Thank you for having me. Good to Nishan.
It's really a pleasure. I've listened to you on several other podcasts, quite active and a strong voice in 2020. And I really appreciate the time that you've taken to share more, and that's how this stuff works, right? It moves in floods and stages. And so I just want to ask you, why do you feel it's important to share your story?
Yeah, I think there had been some recent conversations amongst people that I knew from the community and recognizing that maybe there were still aspects, particularly about the LA Kundalini community and teachers that had not yet truly been illuminated and that had kind of flown under the radar in the last couple of years. So my intention is to maybe shed a little bit more light on that and hopefully in that process kind of open the door potentially for others to share or to at least kind of begin to recognize what's going on there as well for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Um, I know that your own journey into 3HO, obviously from your bio, but also from the other podcasts that I've listened to and learning a little bit about your history. I speak specifically that you've been vocal from 2020 because, having been a real like enthusiast and then kind of having awakening prior to 2020, you had earlier years of kind of having your veil or your bubble bursted. Um, while people can go back and listen to some of those podcasts and get more details of the story of your personal experiences, I'd love for you to give us kind of a starting point of you coming in. And then I really love that you want to focus on highlighting some of the areas that haven't been spoken to yet, whether it's Golden Bridge or Nine Treasures and all the all the white tantric, whatever that area is. It's like we haven't heard that, and it is important to shed light in new ways with more reflection, more years of metabolizing it. I know you've been doing a lot of work, so take it away. Tell us where you want to begin.
Yeah. So basically, my story with 3HO begins in 2011. I had actually attended a Kundalini yoga class it was probably around maybe 2005, 2006 in New York City. It was at a Crunch gym because I was a Crunch gym member. I remember I walked in and they were doing some hand movements and some chanting, and I stayed for maybe 5 minutes and I was like, this isn't yoga. So I left. I had been used to doing a vinyasa or a hatha practice, and I got into hot yoga probably about 2002. I started having a yoga practice over 25 years ago, and that was at my own volition. Yoga was kind of popular in Hollywood in the 90s, and I had seen it, in magazines and films. And so yoga and meditation, I began doing on my own as a teenager, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the practice. I did recognize that there was somewhat of a mental and spiritual component to it that I very much enjoyed. And in 2011, I was living in Hollywood at the time. I was pursuing a career as an actress, and I had recently gone through two very challenging breakups. I will say that from the time I was a teenager, there was a part of me that had always wanted to find a partner, build a life, have children, be married, have a wedding, all of that. I think that's for many of us, an enculturation and a dream, and that's okay, But I was in my late 20s at that point in 2011, and I was pretty heartbroken. And I also was, in the entertainment industry, when you pursue it as somebody who's in front of the camera, there is an awful lot of judgment and rejection. And I didn't have a very strong community of support in Los Angeles. I had sort of used those, romantic relationships that I had been involved with as my support and friend circle, and everything else was sort of all I had known in LA. I'd only been there for a few years at the time. And my family I had some extended family in San Diego, but also in Virginia. And so that remains true to this day. Although now I'm living in San Diego with my family, I'm so grateful for them. They took me in when I left LA in 2018, and I'm very lucky to have their support. Anyway, back to 2011. So I was just feeling a little bit lost and heartbroken, and I was dealing with a lot of emotion and didn't really have a framework within which to kind of understand the very challenging and difficult things I was feeling and going through. And I also was truly looking for, as I said, family and community, because I didn't really have that in LA. And one of my exes had a friend who had a yoga studio in Burbank, and they were having a 1 month for $30 or $40 special, unlimited, come to all the classes. And so I tried out a Kundalini yoga class one morning, and it was different, and there was meditation in it. And I had been looking for a meditation practice. I'd actually kind of shopped around to a few. I don't know if I found them on Craigslist or, where, like, we didn't have Meetup back then, but I had actually attended a few meditation groups in LA. I was trying to find something that I could attend regularly. Nothing had resonated, and one very clearly screamed to me, cult, very ironically. There was a man at the front, and when I came in, he said, welcome. Everybody said welcome to me, and then he immediately complimented me, saying my energy was so meditative, and he could tell I was an old soul and all this stuff. And it just all felt very fishy. And, everybody was, giggling a little too loud at everything he said. And, all eyes were locked on him. And I thought, this feels culty. Anyway, I went to this Kundalini yoga class one day at that yoga studio in Burbank, and something did shift in me somatically. I can say that. It was whether, the movements were new and I'd never done anything like that using those particular muscles in my body, or, I really at that point resonated somehow with the chanting. It just felt new, and it felt fresh, and it felt like a new path that I could pursue. And it filled that sort of like meditation thing that I had been looking for. I told one of my best friends at the time, another actress, that I had gone to this class and that I really liked it. And she said, "Oh, you need to start coming to Golden Bridge with me." And I said, "Oh, isn't that studio, just down the street from where I live?" And she said, "Yes, I've been going there. Those classes, that's how I manifested my car. That's how I manifested these films that I have been working on. That's how I, manifested the relationship, that she was in at the time." And she said, "You really need to come. You need to come to this class with," she said, Tej. She teaches every day at 9 o'clock. And she said, "Let's go on Thursday." And I did. I went with her. And as another friend of mine said, it was a whole vibe in there. There were well over 100 people in this class at 9 in the morning, and everybody was very enthusiastically chanting and doing the movements. And there were beautiful tankas and large crystals, and the lighting was very beautiful. And it was this beautiful space with exposed brick and lovely, huge, high ceilings, and this gorgeous polished wood, and this teacher on a stage in this, costume that was nothing like I'd ever seen before. And, she was espousing what you could say is spiritual wisdom, but some of it seemed to resonate with me. And there was a very good sound system, and the music was beautiful, whether it was Sonatum Car tracks or what we were listening to, I don't really remember. But after the class, they had said, when I came in at the front desk, they said, we do have a new student special, 10 classes for $100. You can sign up for that if you'd like. And I said, "Let me try the class first." And so then after the class, I went back out and I said, "Sign me up." And I was in the lobby with my friend, and a couple women that she knew came up and, said hi to her. And then one of them said, "Are you going to Solstice?" Mind you, this was in May of 2011. And Solstice is always in June in New Mexico, as we well know. And so I said, "What's solstice?" And they kind of explained it to me. And I was like, "That sounds epically awesome. I want to go do that." And I was a Burning Man attender at this point, and I really loved festivals, and I loved music, and I loved camping. And I'd never really been to New Mexico before. I don't know that I actually had. And it sounded exotic and awesome, and like a spiritual Burning Man, and what I wanted. So I asked my friend, how do I sign up for this? She sent me the website link to 3HO, and they had SAVA positions available with the kids camp. And I mean, again, that really resonated with me. I love children. And I called them and they said, yeah, we can sign you up. It's $200. And I said, yeah, I can afford $200. And they said, you just need to arrive by this date. And my friend and I, a friend of mine with her friend, they'd wanted to go on a road trip to Santa Fe and then Las Vegas. So they took my car, we drove out, they dropped me off, and I flew back. But anyway, that was my introduction and very sort of fast indoctrination. I did the 3 days of white tantric yoga. I think I only did a half day on the first day because it felt a little much, trying to figure out what I was experiencing. But on the second day of the white tantric yoga, that first solstice in 2011, I did have a physiological experience that one could perhaps say was a Kundalini awakening. Essentially, we were in the middle of a Kriya, and I was partnered with a second gen 3HO man, and he knew the mantras and all the tracks really, really well. So he was very solid and, very sort of good at meditating and knew what was going on. And it kind of, the only thing I can, kind of compare it to was, I have felt, IV pushes of drugs, in a medical sense. I had an accident once at the hospital and they had to give me a small amount of morphine. And, like I could feel that sort of moving through the vasculature of my body. Like I could feel it starting to work. It was like we were in the middle of this Kriya, in the middle of this very long day of white tantric. And I just felt like something like drop into my system, like in it. And, whether it was sort of a beta endorphin situation or, pineal DMT, they say that happens. I don't know, but all of a sudden, everything was just like, whoa. And it felt like this kaleidoscope had kind of exploded in my brain and in my body. And the colors looked different. And I was like so much more sensitive to things. And everything just shifted for me somehow. And I was just like, I want more of this. Not to mention, I definitely felt very high from the experience of being on, the solstice land up there and in that incredibly gorgeous setting. And,
That's right.
yeah.
I want to pause you and just say, so you started your first class in May. I'm assuming, okay, so then you heard about solstice right away and kind of like went right into the track of planning to go to solstice. But I'm assuming you probably kept going to classes between that first class and before you went to solstice. So by the time you went to a few classes, planned your trip to go to solstice, had you already started wearing a turban, or were you just covering your hair when you went to class? Had you already started wearing white? Like what part of you started already transitioning into some lifestyle habits before even that solstice?
Sure. Yeah. I had a few scarves and bandanas in my wardrobe for years. And when I was in college, so at least 10 years prior in New York, I had kind of gotten into like wearing like India sandals and saris and not shaving. And so I kind of had some of this sort of more hippie-ish stuff in my wheelhouse. Um,
Which is why it made it so resonant, which is why so much of it's like, oh my God, this is my people, right? Because there's
yeah.
elements of like, whoa, I've been searching for this and this is resonant. So I can see kind of like the draw. And like you said, you like camping. So going up into the special and then hearing the mythology of the land at solstice. If you were a new student, I
Yes.
kind of want you to give us a picture of what it was like after you heard about solstice and the buildup. If you were coming to classes pre-solstice, then there was like a buzz around going to solstice, just like there's a buzz around covering your hair, just like there's a buzz around wearing white. And it
Yes.
starts to become kind of trendy. And you don't even know that you're kind of like, oh my God, I'm so excited. Right. And then everybody's like coming in white. So I'm kind of curious about that experience for you, since it sounded like you jumped right to solstice.
Yeah. I mean, I dove in deep very fast, but
But that's not uncommon. I'm learning that that actually is a part of a lot of people's experiences that start around May or June, right? April, May or June. A lot of when I started teaching, I noticed new students going into La La Land by wearing white, covering their hair, and then going to solstice. And as soon as
Yes.
they came back from solstice, they were an entirely different person
Yeah.
when they come back to my class. And so I'm guessing that's the setup of kind of like how the next 8 years went for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was, as you said, this sort of buzz, and I can't pinpoint exactly who said what or whether or not, these classes I had attended at Golden Bridge. It was just a handful prior, maybe three prior to
Three.
Solstice.
Okay.
But there was a population there that was wearing turbans. A lot of people wore white. And the teachers, and I'm certain Tage would have been talking about solstice, and how you were going to get major downloads and do a lot of deep cleaning, and really have an opportunity to make a shift and start a new 40-day meditation. And all of this seemed very attractive to me. Yes, I also had started a blog at the time that I called Spiritual Warrioress. And I actually had a picture of a native, like it was kind of like a Native American inspired, but it was a lady with like dark blonde hair and braids and then a white buffalo. And I'd found this on the internet. This was prior to attending at Golden Bridge. But then once I sort of, started to like learn about, because Tej would talk a lot about the Sikh gurus. And then, as time went along, I learned more. But, there is this, I think, in built into Yogi Bhajan's teachings too, this warrior
Yes,
archetype.
but also the warrioress. So I
Warrior
want to just pause and just be like, whoa, like from the perspective of a spiritual seeker that is kind of like trying to like, be the best they can be while pursuing this really ambitious career. And to have resonance like that you have spiritual warriors blog that she starts writing and then
Yeah, so
comes
it's
into
just
contact with 3HO and
right.
the middle name is Carr and it's a princess, like
Yeah. And then with the white buffalo and everything, it just and mind you, like I said, all of that was prior to Golden Bridge. But then, I was like, what are the odds? What a synchronicity, like, the white
exactly.
and warrioress. And of course, as time went on and I learned about, the ladies camps and then like the military training that was, initially done with YB in the 70s. I mean, all of it, I was just like, whoa. And I think it is sort of,
And
yeah.
it lends to the mythology, I think is what I want to name, is that
Mm,
as a new student, right, you're coming in and you are seeking, new healthy community practices, like all well-meaning things. And yet we can kind of like get caught up in the flurry, right, and not even notice things. And this is why I wanted to point it out, is because folks, being a new student and then being sent to not being sent, but encouraged to go to Solstice happens in all yoga studios all around the world. And
yeah.
so keep it going. So you go to Solstice, have this amazing epiphany experience, and I'm guessing you're wearing like a basic scarf and white,
That's
right?
about right. I do have some pictures that I could share with you. I have a picture from when that my friend took with her camera when she dropped me off that first day. And we followed the directions, went up the whatever is it 31 or 13-mile road? I can't remember. And I remember when she dropped me off, like past the signs and everything. And of course there's a greeter there saying go this way. And it was a guy with a beard. And my friends go, whoa, he has such peace in his eyes, like, whoa, you're like in the land of the hippies now, Jules. And I was like, yeah, remember, like, I really loved that movie, Almost Famous. Like, 1973 kind of always resonated with me. I always loved Zeppelin. And I was just like, yeah. And then, I'm meeting these first gen folks up there. And I was like, these are OG hippies, man. Like, this is what I've been looking for, that vibe. I'd always resonated with, this idea of breaking away from, maybe something that wasn't serving, in terms of previous enculturation or existing social structures. And there was a part of me that always recognized that some things needed to change. I always was like, hashtag decolonize. So anyway, all of it just kind of resonated with me. And then, I didn't question seeing like the TV monitors and the giant picture of Harbhajan Singh Yogi Ji everywhere. I was like, huh, this is interesting. Why is everybody laughing at everything he says? And, but he seemed so, it just like, everybody was just again that like all eyes glued, everybody listening, everybody taking this as the word of God. And I was like, well, maybe there's something to this. And then when I had that kind of physiological experience and shift, through those very long days of meditation with white tantric yoga, I was like, oh yeah, this is legit, and I had already sort of not wanted to drink much or smoke cannabis much. None of that was really resonating with me anymore either. I was kind of wanting to get out of that kind of thing that, people do at parties or when they get together. And this group, I learned, being up there, that they're sober and that they're vegetarian, and that, part of the teachings and the culture there is, to get married and have children. And there was the children's camp that I was involved with. And so all of this, I was like, okay, like these are men who, are not going to like, drink and get abusive and angry with me. They're not going to be sitting and smoking, weed on the sofa every night when I come home, if I marry one, they're meditating, they're doing yoga, they're vegetarian. I'd been vegetarian for, a decade and a half at that point. And I was like, this is perfect. Like I know that if I meet a guy within this group, like they're not going to be an asshole. And I still at that point was, to be honest, I was looking for a husband. I really was. And the teachings, you get married. So I was like, great, great, sign me up, like find me a husband here. And I had, what could be considered a bit of a romance with a second gen man, for a few months, maybe 6, 9 months. He lived in New Mexico, and I was in Los Angeles. We saw each other a couple of times. But then come June, so a year later now, 2012, he was like, Jules, I'm sorry. Like, I don't think that, I could have a romantic relationship with you, for whatever
You
set of reasons.
you met at the first solstice?
Met at the first solstice. I
Okay.
think his family was kind of like, look, she's an actress, she's not a second gen person. She's independent, she's in LA, she's got a career there. You need somebody who's going to come to New Mexico, live with you here, give you children here, Anyway, so I think he was kind of dissuaded by his family, and that's kind of what made his decision for him. But anyway, at that point, I was doing like the level 3, I guess, with KRI in 2012 in
So
Espanola.
pause,
Mhm.
pause. Within 1 year,
I had
you
done
did
teacher training level 1. I had started doing the level 2s, and now I was doing level 3 with
within
KRI
1 year.
in 1 year.
So how is this possible? Did you do an abridged level 1 after solstice? Did you sign up for the abridged level 1 versus the year-long level 1?
No, I did. It was the 9 month or whatever level 1.
So it's that 9 month, and then you immediately started doing level 2s, or you started doing level 2s while doing level 1?
Yes. So at the time, there was a teacher training being offered, starting that fall at Golden Bridge, but I didn't sign up like quickly enough. But then people were talking about the teachers training that Tej was doing. And Tej was the teacher that, I like to go to her classes the most. And probably that was because there were like upwards of 100, 150 people there every morning. And the group energy just felt so huge and uplifting and powerful. And I'm going to be honest, I had, quite a good deal of sort of, psychological mother issues that at that point had not been fully, sort of, or even begun to be uncovered. And, here is this kind of mother figure, with giving guidance and, being there every day. And I think there was a part of me, psychologically that resonated with that as somebody who has mother issues. Anyway, but so somebody told me about the Tej Hari G1 teachers training, and that was going on over on the west side of town, Marina Del Rey. And so I went to a Harijiwan class, and then I started going to the Harijiwan Tej workshops that they were having almost every weekend at Golden Bridge. And those were massively big productions. They had these multiple gongs that Harijiwan was playing. And, again, they were using the very, very sophisticated and hi-fi sound system that they had at Golden Bridge. And there were hundreds, I mean, hundreds, 300, I think was the capacity there at Golden Bridge at the time. And they would often hit that, people showing up for these workshops. So there was just a lot of energy. And, they were espousing, like, we're doing these rebirthings, you're rebirthing, you're clearing, you're burning, you're providing yourself a way to give yourself a therapeutic experience. And they were doing these workshops where, you were going into literally, like, back to, like, in utero, like you're back in the womb. And I have not gone back and looked at the actual rebirthing series from Yogi Bhajan, but it was my understanding that they were following all of these and giving them as workshops at the time. um I know there's a lot here. Hari Jiwan had
I want to
studied.
pause and just
Yeah,
say, you had said you started going to workshops, then you signed up for teacher training. And
and
so
I
the
signed up
teacher
for
training
teacher
you
training.
did that lasted
Yes,
that long, 9 months. This is between
yes,
that first solstice and the second solstice, was with Tej and Hari G1, in Marina Del Rey or wherever they were doing it.
yes.
So during this time, when you first came back from Solstice, you started getting a relationship with a second gen. So that's one connection in. And then also you started being more involved at Golden Bridge, I'm guessing. So you start come back and you're more committed to what, like volunteering or working there, like in Golden Bridge, and then immediately sign up for teacher training by whatever time. Kind of give us a sense of that timeline.
Yeah, all of the above. And, I learned about Seva at Solstice and, the work exchange, which, I mean, it's free labor and, a for us by us system. But anyway, to me, I thought, Seva was great. And, by doing Seva, I was giving back to the world. It was a way to volunteer. You're always told, like, do more for others. And so that resonated with me. And I will say also the music, I was like, oh, that, these songs are so beautiful. And I hadn't heard them before, but so I started downloading tracks from the internet as I could find. I started with some Sonatum, and then I think I went into some young Narinjan and older Narinjan. And anyway, I just started downloading a lot of the music and then listening to it on my phone and on my computer. And then, Tej and Hari Jiwan in their classes, they always said, you need to be making sure that you have the music playing 24/7 in your house, have it playing in all four corners of, the rooms. You can have different mantras in different rooms, but this is again to, like, help your mind to be, on this track of God, constantly meditating on the Satnam or whatever. And this is going to fast track you, in this sort of like vertical path that you're going on. And this mantra is for wealth, and this mantra is for love, and this one will find you your soulmate, and this one will give you $9 million.
When did you change your name?
I actually
Or took on a name? Yeah, when did you take on the name? And kind
yeah.
of tell us more, like how the commitment went. So like things started happening.
So I like when I went to Solstice, I had actually had I don't remember, probably from some other meditation group that I had dabbled with. The name Saraswati had kind of come up, and I really resonated with the goddess Saraswati. And so I was using that my first few months, but then it was probably 2012, maybe end of 2011. I did the apply through the 3HO website, and the name I got back was Amrita, so I started using that.
So basically within this first year, full transition, signed up for teacher training, added Amrita to your name, started wearing a turban.
I also went to India.
Bring it. Tell us.
So after Solstice, I did quite a bit of traveling, and this was kind of part of the whole plan. It was like sort of the sabbatical that I was doing from my acting, kind of to try to help with this heartbreak and sort of open myself up and get spiritual. Anyway, I ended up in India, and in talking with people at Solstice, I had learned about a little bit about like the Sikh stuff, but I didn't know much, to be honest. It was, to me, it was just another Indian religion, an Indian temple. I really didn't know much at all. But somebody had said, go to Anandapur Sahib. And I wrote it down wrong, but I still had written it in my journal. And anyway, I ended up in Anandapur Sahib, and I ended up, staying at the Dashmish Sadan, Yogi Bhajan's. And I had a whole experience there. And there's a man there, I want to say his name is Kalidas, kind of takes care of the grounds. And, he showed me where, the main Keshgar Sahib and all that is. And there was a couple other people there from the UK and India who sort of, showed me everything. I'd never had prashad before. I didn't know how to tie a turban. I didn't have turban material. They helped me make like a sort of a makeshift dastar, and how to dress properly. And anyway, so I got a crash course in how to attend how to attend a Gurdwara when I was in India. And I was by myself, and I did a lot of meditating in 11 days there in Anandpur Sahib. And to say I got downloads would be an understatement, but I just loved it. I mean, it was so magical, all of it. I mean, it couldn't be more exotic for me, and it couldn't be, more peaceful and wonderful. And I mean, Gurbani and Kirtan is incredible, and I am never going to downplay that, nor my experience with it. And I do want to say that, those temples are definitely very sort of like separate from, 3HO, as we know. But anyway, I just sort of got, a much more a broader understanding of what was going on. And I wanted more of that. So then I spent a week in Amritsar, and then I went to Rishikesh for a week, and I traveled a little bit more, came back to LA, and I asked a man who I had met at Solstice, got his email or Facebook, something like that. I said, is there a Gurdwara here in LA? And he said, yeah, come to Guru Ramdas Ashram, on Robertson. So I immediately started getting involved there and doing Seva there. And I just was on a very fast track. Let's just put it that way. But I think, what a few things brought me in. Like I said, there was the resonance, just within me and parts of me, which I think was very earnest and honest. I think, though, that there was a vulnerability, and that I was really seeking community. I was seeking family. I was seeking a system within which a framework to understand heavy things like grief and heartbreak and death. Oh, that was the other thing. I think there were 6 family members and friends who died within like a 6-month period there in 2011.
Just dealing
That
with so
also
much
kind of
grief.
brought me into.
Yeah. And I think what you're highlighting is just such an important thing for all of us to hear, in that so much of what feels like resonance is areas in self-development or personal well-being that we're taught is good for us, right? So it's kind of like what you said. Well, it's important to give back, and it's important to, like, the land, or, whatever, right? Kind of following your heart. These ideas can get into us, and based on the history of what we're holding, right? And then suddenly you come into contact with the mythology of these things. We don't know how much is really getting planted per core, per class. So one thing that really stands out for me is to hear your story, and that from class to solstice to a rapid exponential entry into India, Sikh gurus, Sikhi community, local ashram, a physiological based breath body practice that you get to discipline yourself, a lot of your personal practices that you had already decided on in your life, whether it was vegetarianism or, not drinking. Like, these are, again, are attached to well-being practices. So here this resonance exists. So why wouldn't it be the best thing since sliced bread, right? And of course, why wouldn't you commit yourself more and more?
But I have to say that a really huge component of all of it was the production aspect, as well as the hype and the celebrity aspect that was provided by both Golden Bridge and the building population and student sort of following of Hari Jiwan and Tej, and what they were doing at the time with Gurmukh and Guru Shabad at Golden Bridge.
So
It
yeah,
was.
share this because this is such an important thing because you add the celebrity culture, you add the high fidelity production, the group energy you keep talking about, and we're human beings that are social creatures and we naturally kind of vibe in connection with others, right? And it can take us over. So yeah, go there.
I mean, this is pre-Instagram. I don't think Instagram came around until 2012. So in 2011, we didn't have Instagram. We had Facebook. There wasn't a whole lot of just sort of like social media sharing stuff. It just wasn't the same. Our phones weren't getting internet at the same capacity. So, you had to go somewhere to still like physically have an experience. And this was definitely an experience at Golden Bridge. And like I said, they had put a lot of money into the actual space, the architecture, the art. The pieces that were there were very beautiful and very special. And so Hari Jiwan and Tej have, and I think they were kind of following the Yogi Bhajan way, but a method of teaching that is, and Gurmukh does this too. It's a little bit like an aerobics class, and there's like this, like, go, 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 like you're really driving, like bring the energy, bring it in, pull it down, go, push yourself, let's go. And the music would be like cranked up with these like, huge speakers. And you're just like, there is like literally like you're vibrating and you're chanting at the top of your lungs and you're moving and you're sweating. And it just felt like something was really happening. And I mean, I think, as I was saying, on a physiological level, I'm sure it was. Back to sort of those rebirthing workshops that were also, they were doing those as part of their teacher training weekends as well. So the way that so Golden Bridge was having its own teacher training. I have to clarify this. And then Tej and Hari Jiwan were having their own distinct separate teachers training. However, they were still part of the Golden Bridge training. However, Golden Bridge didn't know that they were having a teacher's training. And it was very hush hush and you weren't supposed to talk about it. It was like exclusive. It was their own thing. And the way that Hari Jiwan set up these teacher training weekends is it would be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And if you wanted, you could come on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. My apologies. You could come on Friday, or you could come on Saturday, or you could come on Sunday. You could come for part of it. You could come for all of it. There would be a long meditation Friday evening, and there'd be a long meditation one Saturday in the middle of the day, and then one Saturday evening, and another long one, like another workshop Sunday morning. And this would involve yoga and then some kind of a longer kriya, whether that was 62-minute Sat Kriya or one of these rebirthings, 62-minute Sudarshan Chakra. Anyway, that's a draw, for somebody who's wanting to further their meditation practice, get ever higher, like have more of an experience, see how far out they could go. And he always would bring in the gongs into the meditation with these tracks, particularly more towards the end of these longer meditations, when you're already kind of in an altered state and out of body anyway. He would always do long gong baths, and he would do, the way he would speak involved, kind of this hypnosis. They would call it self-hypnosis. I think they were, following the script from YB, from these original times he taught. That was another thing that both Tej and Hari Jiwan, really made it a selling point that they were the only teachers out there who were following, word for word, the teachings of Yogi Bhajan, these incredibly powerful teachings, because she was the archivist and that they were typing up these transcripts. So they knew, exactly. So the only place that you could get, the download from Yogi Bhajan that was like identical to the way he taught it, which was so powerful, was to attend their workshops. So, that was a selling point. But Hari Jiwan would use this manner, this method of speaking. And, if we were to pull up a recording of him, I could kind of point it out. But during these meditations in particular, it was kind of a soft monotone voice. And when the gong would be brought in with that, you're all, like I said, if you've been meditating for hours, you are in an altered space. Biochemically, you're in an altered space. I'm sorry, you just are, like we know this. And then, whatever he would say or guide, as far as, psychically where you're going, in your psyche, in your psychology, whatever, in your mind tracks. I have no idea what he was dropping in there, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
And I think the essence of it was, meditate more, do more seva. There's that one track that was made, I think, in the 80s at some point, and it's the repeated recording of Yogi Bhajan, saying, the obey, obey,
Serve,
serve,
love,
serve,
excel,
love, excel,
obey,
you know.
obey, serve. Yes. And I want to pause and just so that listeners are following us, who she's speaking of, so first, right, Gurmukh and her husband Gershabed, right, at Golden Bridge, and then Tej and Hari Jiwan, right? For those of you that go way back, Hari Jiwan was the toner bandit dude in the 80s that went, to jail and reinvented himself when he came out and, got a, a ticket, into Golden Bridge and to be able to like start being a teacher. And we'll have somebody on the podcast explaining that whole scenario soon. But the point is that one of the techniques you're talking about that Tej and Hari Jiwan obviously used in the building of their what I call the spawns, new cult spawns, is the specialness, right? How you created this architecture. You explained the architecture around how their training, their workshops would be extra special because Tej was actually given the long-term job of being the archivist and YB. And she was also, from my understanding, the assistant to Gurmukh for a long time. And so there's just long histories of these older teachers and their relationship to YB and how they even ended up in this teacher path. And there's significant things you're pointing out about celebrity culture and who doesn't want to be with the elite and the most special of the Kundalini group. And so we have to really understand that the different locations in LA were really vying against each other in a way, as well as the teacher trainings, right? To fill people and get people for their training over a different training is a really big deal.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. And I'll give a quick timeline. So, Gurmukh Gurushabed met, my understanding, at a Golden Temple restaurant in Los Angeles. She'd already been previously married. They get together, they have a child. So this is maybe the 80s, I guess, 70s, late 70s, 80s. Hari Jiwan and Tej got married probably in the early 80s as well. They were an arranged marriage, Yogi Bhajan. They have a child. Things are going along. They're part of the LA community, both couples. Gurmukh starts, I guess she had been in Tucson. Anyway, at some point she starts teaching in Los Angeles in the 90s. And as we know, she had celebrity clientele. I know there's pictures of her with Madonna and Courtney Love
And well known as the birthing
Michael
yoga
Jackson,
person, the person who goes to for prenatal and Kundalini kind of
prenatal. She was
really became
all of
famous in that capacity. Sure.
Yeah, and then, she was teaching out of her home in Los Angeles, and then she opened a studio. And this is, I think we're talking early 2000s now. And then the studio ended up moving to Hollywood. And somewhere between the time it was on 3rd Street and into the original location, which was behind the ArcLight Theater in Hollywood. Okay, so again, backing up the train, Hari Jiwan and that whole, taking the hit for the fraudulent activity, the federal fraud with the toner scheme. So it was my understanding that he went to prison for 2 years. So he's out, maybe this is around like 2001, 2002. At this time, he and Tej had gotten a divorce, because of this whole thing. They gave up their house. She said they had to sell the house, to pay off the debt and everything else. Tej is heartbroken. What do I do? She goes to work for Gurmukh. And so she's working for Gurmukh as her sort of, like paperwork, front desk, whatever, helper outer person with this Golden Bridge yoga studio operation that she has. Gurmukh needs a sub at some point, a substitute teacher, 2003, 2004. And she says, Tej, go teach. And Tej is like, I can't teach. She says, no, you need to teach for me. I'm sick. I'm out of town. Whatever the case was, she couldn't teach one day. And then this started happening more and more and more. And so then Tej was teaching more and more and more, but as a substitute for Gurmukh. Hari Jiwan gets out of prison. For whatever set of reasons, Guru Shevard and Gurmukh allow him to teach at Golden Bridge. What else is he going to do? He's got a criminal record. He's part of this cult. This is all he knows. I think they kind of took pity on him and said, okay, you can teach here. So he and Tej, now we're in the mid 2000s, start teaching classes at Golden Bridge. Tej is teaching more and more and more as Gurmukh is traveling more and more and more, doing teacher trainings and workshops around the globe. Gurmukh loves traveling. She loves shopping. She loves going to all these different countries. And, Tej now is starting to gain a following at Golden Bridge in Hollywood. Literally her classes started out with like 2-3 people in them, 3-4 people. I saw the sign-in sheets from back then. Mm-hmm. And then, you're teaching every single day at the same place. They started calling it church because, it was like, oh, let's go to church, 9:00 every morning, this woman's going to be teaching. And it took off. And, by the time I got there, Russell Brand was going to the classes. And I had already enjoyed speaking or listening to Russell Brand speak. I enjoyed hearing him on podcasts and things like that. So he resonated with me. And then, of course, it's like I'm sitting there next to Russell Brand in a class and Orlando Bloom is here. And who else came? Rachel McAdams, I sat next to once in a Hari Jiwan class. There were several celebrities, that I admired and liked. And it was, like I said, it was just a whole vibe. And I thought that I was like part of something. And then Russell Brand joined the teachers training and, so it was like, great, here we are. And there were also some like wealthy socialite people who were part of, this cohort that I was with. And we were having large parties in the Hollywood Hills at these huge mansions that were, the Kundalini parties, and it just was a whole circus.
It's just so important, everything you're illuminating, because what we all have to remember is it's still going on today, that,
yes.
And we'll get there in the telling of the story, but Gurmukh and Tej and Nine Treasures and Hari Jiwan and the techniques you're talking about in terms of the sound and the gongs and the extensive workshops, all this is still going. So as you illuminate it, it's so important because it's a part of the draw. It's a part of the mystical mystique, and it's not by accident. It's like I have zero doubt that Hari Jiwan had his mastermind plan and was bringing it to life so much earlier than many would have ever known, because the repeat formula to me, like a lot of the things I'm hearing you say, it's like what I remember my parents attending with YB, and then they would come back and we would see all these changes happen in our, our community as kids. And it was just right into the next thing, right into the next thing. And everything was so transformative and lives got changed. And so I'm right there with you. Thank you for painting that.
Well, and so also at this point, so Hari Jiwan was also teaching classes out of his apartment he kind of lived on the border of Santa Monica and Venice. So he was also doing classes there. And, those were like the real exclusive classes with like his sort of like original crowd of followers. And at this point, and I think this is an interesting turning point for those students as well, they were all about my age and they had been attending his classes now for several years. They decided to start wearing turbans and all white because he said to them, if you wear the turban, if you wear the white, if you do this, this will take you to the next level. And then he said to them, if you get married, then your yoga practice will go to the next level. Like you think white tantric yoga is amazing, like marriage is the ultimate kriya. So Hari Jiwan arranged several marriages within this yoga community that was developing around him on the west side of Los Angeles. This did a couple of things. I think the most important was it started to create this sort of well bonded, social structure because you have a wedding officiated by Hari Jiwan with the community there. You're now like kind of like locked into that with the community supporting it. I mean, this is what a wedding and marriage traditionally has been. But
So
just
is this happening when you're in your first year with teacher training with these folks, or is this like several years in?
a couple of the weddings had already happened by that point. So when I joined, there were these couples, these young couples that were my age. Um,
Committed, right?
and they were committed. I mean, so when I came in, like the girls were still maybe wearing like black yoga pants and like kind of a white top and like a scarf. But this their evolution was kind of happening at the same time as mine, and that they kind of started switching over to wearing like kurti and these tantric necklaces, and then wearing like they called those like kunda pins, and the flowing chuni and all that. Basically a newer version of what the 3HO women had been doing, their evolution of costume through the 70s and into the 80s. These Hari Juwon students were doing the same thing.
Yeah. And I call it the marketing funnel into Siki, which is such a fascinating thing because as soon as a yoga student starts, that funnel begins, and whether or not we recognize it as that, it's kind of like it's the name change, it's sadhana, it's solstice, it's community, and it's all these things that seemingly are good, but it's really moving people into this fantasy land around becoming a devout Sikhi in a 3HO context. It's such a weird thing to look at 20 years out of it.
I mean, it is truly bizarre. But so Hari Jun was also, telling his students, like, that to take things to the next level, you get married. To take things to the next level, you have a child. To take things to the next level, you do the 2.5 hour Kriya every morning. To take things to the next level, you wear this costume. So it's like, just following all of that, all of the teachings.
Follow the formula. Follow the formula.
Follow the formula. But he had a way of, saying like, this is it. And, I do remember in all the classes and workshops, there was a lot of us versus them rhetoric. So, like, and also talking about us as the chosen ones, the special ones, you're the ones lucky enough to have done however many incarnations to get to this point. Don't blow it, don't lose it. This is your destiny. You're saving the world. You're clearing generations of karma on either end. I mean, it was kind of a lot of pressure. Like it was like, oh God, okay,
And it also feeds that part of us that really wants to create impact and be of service and leave a legacy. And these
Yeah.
are like very normal human ambitions. And yeah, so what's interesting is kind of the private faction that he was starting to build. And I know that again, we'll hear more detail in terms of that. Um, what I'm curious about is you're working with Golden Bridge, but taking classes, taking your teacher training over here. So you kind of are starting to kind of like
Both
feel
worlds.
this special group over here,
Yes.
but commit
Yes.
yourself over here to Golden Bridge because it's more glorified. It's the big location. And this place is kind of the secret new spawn that's growing. And that feels wonderful
Yes.
because you're a part of something new that's birthing while you're a part of something big and special.
Yeah, and there was just sort of, like I said, there was all this exclusivity rhetoric that was going on. Golden Ridge was within walking distance to me, and there was no studio on the west side at that time. It was just those classes in Harjiman's apartment. So, and then the teacher training that, I was attending.
Yep.
So, yeah, and it did feel like different and exclusive. And those people felt more committed. They were going to the Gurdwara. And, I didn't see the other yoga students from Golden Bridge attending the Gurdwara and doing as much stuff with the Gurdwara. So, to me, I was like, oh, these people are more committed and more authentic, and they're on a faster path, and they're getting the downloads faster, and their aura is brighter and cleaner, and all the rest of it.
They're following the lifestyle plan, which I want to say out loud that attending solstices was a part of that plan.
Oh,
That
yeah.
started implementing right away because it's a part of the mythology and the storytelling that any of these teachers tell about the commitment they made as they made all these choices. So once again, students like Jules are getting this through the lens of these prolific teachers sharing their amazing mythological story of how their life got changed with these teachings over several decades. And then the community just kind of like reflects this mythological purity back and being like, this must be it.
Well, I think it's like, a few things sort of sold the teachers to me. Tej and Arjun, they had a lot of knowledge about like the Sikhi stuff. They could read the Gurmukhi. They had a lot of stories, that they would tell, whether, as you say, actual like mythology, Yogi Bhajan would tell this story, and literally they were like myths or stories.
And what's so important
Parables.
to what's so important to know about this is every teacher, like we all have stories of our teacher training where each teacher did that in their unique, interesting way of making this special relationship that they had with YB. And the more we hear it, I think it helps because hearing how Tej and Hari Jiwan did it, that's the first time I've ever heard this. I've never, but anybody that grew up, around them would probably not think any of those things were special, but I could see why a new student would feel that was special because of the way that he uh, positioned himself.
And then just simply the costume. And, every time I saw them, they're in those costumes. And it's like, well, if these people are running around LA, confident enough in what they're doing to like live this lifestyle and be in that garb, there must be something to this.
Must be real.
Must be, and then I had been to India and I had seen those Gurdwaras and I had had an experience there and I did really resonate with it and I thought it was so incredible. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it just made sense. And then I'm sitting next to Russell Brand. So it's like, no question, and where there's love, there's no question. And yeah, as you were saying, you build your whole yearly schedule around solstice because Yogi Bhajan said, if you go to summer solstice and winter solstice, everything else will fall into place around those. If you have your 40-day practice, this will happen. There was a lot of if then. And okay, with the exclusivity, with the if thens, with the, do this and all the hyperbole that, was sort of brought in through, I think it's kind of a cultural thing, that hyperbole. The more I sort of, have listened to different South teachers from South Asia kind of speak, I think there's kind of a cultural way of, talking in hyperbole, like, you do this and it's 1,000 times more powerful than if you did this. And
Well, what I want to say that I think a good cult leader does is take something that might be culturally contexted in language, and
mhm.
then that's in another culture somewhat say fetishized or mysticized or fantasized, and so then by
Exoticized,
using that
orientalized.
exoticized, exactly, so then
And
by doing that to white Americans, right, and the command, the penetration, so much of the 3HO bolstering and what YB created is that, right, it's to penetrate us in this way that is culturally out of context, and therefore that's somewhat the draw.
yeah, and I have to say, like, the Orientalism of it, I mean, yeah, like making it seem exotic, like that was, it was so disturbing for me in 2020 to kind of recognize, like, just the sheer amount of white supremacy that is built into this whole system that I was a part of. I mean, down to the fact that we're wearing white and we're talking about white light and white auras and all this purity and
It's painful, painful that the
white
unravel
women.
of the white woman, the white exceptionalism, like the extent of this unravel has definitely been my last entire year. So we won't take up this podcast with that, but y'all
Oh,
can keep dismantling it because we're going there, folks.
yes.
So true, so true.
But yeah, so I mean, okay, so Hari Jiwan was at his teacher's trainings on those, like, Saturday, Saturday was the full long day. there would be a lunchtime, and it would be like this lunch bunch meeting that he would have with his inner circle. And these are his longtime students, the ones that were going to his apartment classes and who were the devotees and who were doing the seva for him at the teachers' trainings, like this core that he had developing that was like starting to dress like in the more traditional, like, 3HO with the flowing chuni and all that. So they were starting to really become a thing. And I remember like wanting to attend a couple of those lunch bunches, but that was like the next level. That was like really exclusive. Like if you sat in there, like, you really needed to listen to this teacher and do what he's talking about. And I did a couple of times, to be honest. There was like a lot of cursing and it was a lot of negative talk against 3HO and KRI, and basically talking about how, like, you don't need to join their system. It was planting seeds for, we are moving in a different direction. You don't need to do their teacher training levels. You don't need to do their teacher training trainer thing. That's just putting more money into them. Like, we are doing something very different. We are taking the teachings, the pure teachings. KRI has butchered and botched and, written, they haven't done the translations correctly. Like whoever was typing those up didn't even know Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib. So, when Yogi Bhajan was quoting, something from Gurbani, they wrote it down wrong. So, we are taking the original recordings and we are retranslating them. So, stick with us because we are the purest lineage. That's essentially what those meetings were always about. And then he would talk in this very sort of like flowery language, that word salad that, Guru Jagat adopted, and had ways of cadence and speaking that, we're just kind of like, okay, like speaking in fluff, essentially, kind of like Yogi Bhajan did. I don't know. It never really fully resonated for me. I'm going to be honest, that exclusive group, although I was sort of part of it, I was friendly with them.
Yeah, and how common it is to kind of feel like, this doesn't fit right, but we stay in something, right? And also how that so much is historical in 3HO, the exclusivity, the special meetings, the special groups, the inner circle.
The inner
And
circle.
for him to have this language as early as this goes back to the master plan that he's operating on, because that's early. He's foreshadowing a loyalty system that puts him and Tej as more authentic than, say, the whole 3HO KRI. But he's doing this while riding the foundation of Golden Bridge,
And KRI.
and KRI and 3HO.
which is
So
allowing him, yeah.
extracting legitimacy, extracting students, extracting accessibility to other
Yes.
students, but planting seeds in his inner circle of the real special wisdom and the direction that eventually, folks, becomes Rama. So we're setting up. So
Setting
we're
up.
setting
And then
this up.
it started to sort of leak into their workshops and classes. They literally, like, I quote, they would say, fuck Golden Bridge. And I don't know if, you can bleep that out, but, fuck KRI, like, fuck Gurmukh, like, those people are, crooks and sharks. And they're, it was always talking extremely negatively about everyone else in the greater sort of, white 3HOC, Kundalini, SSSC, whatever community, whatever this group is. Okay?
Yeah, and so you're getting that, but in little doses. Meanwhile, you're still connected to Golden Bridge. You're still doing Seva at the Gurdwara directly. So you're also in the community itself, not
Yeah,
just
and
him.
the Gurdwara was established, Golden Bridge was established. I did 15 months of seva, meaning unpaid free labor, at Golden Bridge Hollywood, which was also kind of like, I think the manager at the time, the general manager, recognized, here's somebody who's already hooked in, a fanatic, she'll do work for free. We don't need to hire her. She's not going anywhere.
Well, and it's a part of the ethos since the 70s. So this is just actually a part of the built-in culture of businesses running on free labor or devotional labor, as it likes to be masked.
Sure, and 100%. However, I do want to point out that Golden Bridge, starting top down with Gurmukh, had a sort of extra precedence of Seva and how special it was to be able to do Seva for Gurmukh and her operation. And there was a culture of that that very much took advantage of those of us who were artists, starving, struggling artists, which we were in Hollywood, trying to have a career in the entertainment industry, who were not maybe necessarily able to afford paying for all of these workshops and all of these classes, but wanted to attend as we could and be part of, the community and get as much of it as we could. And, I think as we were talking about, that will be expounded upon more in the future, and hopefully
And
with other guests as well.
and
But
how that's built into the YB mythology of those original teachers as well, about how YB would sprinkle the money on the ground for the students that couldn't afford to come to class, but there had to be an energy exchange, and so how it's so built into the
they
teachings
built in.
itself, and then therefore like a teacher like Gurmukh then centers that around her, right, where YB had all his teachers centering it around him and the service they could do, and then how the teachers just morph and then create that same centering around themselves.
Yeah, and so then Hari Jiwan had his own sort of like Seva system, and then Tej was starting to develop her own Seva system. There was always somebody who, was like Tej's bestie or like, right-hand person who got to play the gong at the end of her classes for everybody, who got to bring her coffee in the morning, who got to rub her feet, whatever, kind of take care of her. And there was a cycle. It was like this like revolving door of Savadars for Tej, that I hadn't been around long enough to kind of bear witness to the fact that this was sort of an ongoing pattern. But as time went on, I began to recognize it. So anyway, I know I've been jumping around, but sort of back to this, we're in 2012 now, moving into 2013, and more in Harjivan and Tej's classes and teacher training workshops at Golden Bridge, they're kind of leaking out this, screw these people. You don't need to come to Golden Bridge, and we are having our kind of own exclusive thing going on the West Side. Like this is starting to come out more and more and more. And, then by the time January 2013, gosh, it seems so long ago, rolls around, word had gotten up to Gurmukh, who was back in town doing her Khalsa Way prenatal training at Golden Bridge. Word had gotten back that, and it was probably came through me, to be honest, because I had mentioned to somebody else who was working at Golden Bridge at the time, I just attended the teacher training workshop with Tej and Hari Jiwan this past weekend, and there were 250 people there. Meanwhile, the new teacher training at Golden Bridge that year only had like 44 students or something.
He was
So
siphoning students.
the word literally gets up to the top floor of Golden Bridge, which is where the offices for, the executive director and Gurmukh and Guru Shabbat were in. And Gurmukh and Guru Shabbat are back in town. They'd been gone and out of town for, several weeks, definitely several months. They just were not around. And so they get word that this is happening, at this teacher training that Tej and Harjivan are doing. They kind of go ballistic because they recognize that, they're kind of stealing the population, as it were, of students, over to their West Side operation. And, what's the solution? Well, they work for us. They got to be under contract with us. We're going to draft up a contract and have them join us exclusively as teachers. So, they contact Hari Jiwan and Tej and confront them about it. And Hari Jiwan is like, no, absolutely not. You don't own me. I'm not signing a contract. I wasn't there when the actual conversations went down. All I knew as a student and somebody working at Golden Bridge at the time was that he was removed from the schedule. Tej was put on as a sub for his classes. I attended, the Tej subbed class. Her energy was very different. Something seemed very off. And then the next morning she did not teach. And, she taught every morning religiously.
Now,
Um,
is Guru Juggett teaching at this time too? Because I know she did her
no, well,
chants
Guru
at Golden
Juggett was,
Bridge.
so Guru Juggett, I first heard of Guru Juggett probably in 2012 from somebody who was a student dabbling at Yoga West who attended the Gurdwara, who I met at the Gurdwara, a middle-aged woman. And she was like, hey, listen to these videos on YouTube. If you like astrology, let's listen to some astrology reports and see like what's in the stars for us this week. This gal, Kundalini Katie, she's pretty good because she was teaching at Yoga West at that time. I want to say Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. So she was kind of like the Tej of Yoga West. And Yoga West was that studio that was across from Guru Ram
So
Dass.
she wasn't working with Guru Harijiwan yet.
Not yet, but she had started attending his, like I know that the summer previously, 2012, she had attended his level 2 up in Grass Valley. So, up more in Northern California that he was running.
Got it. Got it.
Um,
Interesting. Okay.
So
So
she
then-
was part of the, she was listening in on these lunch bunch meetings and attending, these inner circle kind of gatherings and his teacher trainings. And then like at Solstice, she was hanging around the RG1 crowd. So she was, socially kind of part of and I think that so once Harji sort of, found out that she had this following on YouTube with the astrology and that she was, teaching Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. at Yoga West and kind of had a student following there, ding, 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 here's an opportunity. Here's somebody who's got a following. And she's young, she's charismatic. She has a background. She had pursued acting and modeling at one point, and I think she was still interested in that. She wanted to be on a stage. She wanted to be famous. I think there was a motivation there, within her. And Harjiwan recognized that, and he was like, I'm going to take you under my wing. I'm going to teach you, I'm going to teach you how to do this, how to espouse this, exclusivity rhetoric, how to deliver these teachings, how to be part of.
And how to build a persona as the invincible one, right? And she created that whole book about the invincible spirit and all the things. So from 2011, there was a real trajectory for her, no doubt about it. And so, okay, so keep us at Golden Bridge. Suddenly, they obviously get factioned out.
They get factioned out. This is end of January 2013. So, Tej starts trying to figure out, where to teach. And she taught at Russell Brand's house that first morning. And then she taught at a dance studio off of Hollywood Boulevard, that second 9 a.m. class, so now we're 2 days out. And then somebody said, hey, I work at, I think was it Sunset, not Sunset Gower, but Sunset Bronson. Anyway, one of the studios over there in Hollywood, we have space over here on the lot. And I work on the lot, like come teach here. We can, for whatever rental fee, we can have you come teach here. So she started teaching over there. I first attended maybe a couple weeks into this move, and to be honest, like the majority of her student population kind of followed her. Because
I heard it was a big deal, right? That there was like this kind of big walkout with Tej, her students going with her, something like this.
Yeah, I wasn't there for, this quote unquote walkout. So I can't speak to how any of that happened, but I do know that Russell was on Twitter saying, Tej's class is going to be held at this address this morning, with the dance studio address. So, he was announcing, come to my yoga teacher, because he was calling her my yoga teacher at that time. And, they were being photographed by paparazzi, So
yeah, and for those of you that don't know, several years later, RG1 is produced The White Sun, and which was another Prodigy music kind of thing, and really brought this to a whole celebrity level. So this level of formulaic break off and the creation of kind of his inner circle and his special elite, this is by no accident, and it's quite formulaic. So even to hear it right now is so fascinating. So yeah, keep going.
So in I must have been around. It must have been 2012 it was probably 2013. After Yogi Bachchan's birthday sadhana, it must have been 2012. Yogi Bachchan's birthday sadhana at Golden Bridge. I was outside and Harjiwan came out, and I was talking to him, and I said, is my internet okay? Can you hear me okay? I got the message saying that I didn't have connection. he said we started talking about Burning Man because Burning Man was coming up, and I said, so we were at Golden Bridge after Yogi Bhajan birthday sadhana, so August 26th, 2.5 hour long iPhone car. And this is 2012, and I'm outside, and Harjiwan comes out, and I was basically talking with some other students who were longtime Burning Man attendees as well. And I was like, we should go to Burning Man. Burning Man is so awesome. I feel like, yeah, the timeline I'm trying to get correct. But anyway, it was either 2012 or 2013, but I feel like they had left by 2013. So it must have been 2012. Anyway, I and a couple other students convinced Harjiwan to go to Burning Man. So he and a few of his, devout student followers, we all went, and Simrit went. Now, Simrit at the time was a very, very devout Harjiwan follower and considered him her teacher. He had, pushed her to learn Gurmukhi and, sing, some of these mantras and kind of shabads on, her albums. And, she, I think, looked to him as a mentor, and she was attending his teacher trainings and, got roped in, they were up in the Grass Valley teacher trainings that Harjiwan was doing every year at this point. And Simrit would be performing music there, during the teacher trainings. Like, they had developed a relationship. Simrit comes to Burning Man too. So Simrit, myself, Guru Joss, and Harjiwan are there at Burning Man. And there was a man, his name is Anthony, and I guess he and his partner at the time were also very involved in Kundalini and had started going to Harjiwan's teachers trainings. He was a musician and was producing these like sort of like loop tracks with a looper and recording them so they could be just like they were cool. They were really cool with his guitar and some other electronic sounds. Anyway, he was there too. And so he and Simrit had kind of started collaborating a little bit. She would kind of, sing a mantra, and he would have one of these tracks underneath it. So he brought his, whatever, like his PA, his speaker, his guitar to Burning Man. Simrit was there. Gurjas was there. I was there. They said, let's perform at, these various camps. Like, a friend says, we could, sing some mantra and like lead a meditation, at this time on this day. So we kind of had a schedule put together of like where we were going to be doing like, performances and meditations at Burning Man. Harjiwan brought his gong. So we've got this like loop track guitar, Simrit singing, Harjiwan gong, and then Guru Joss and I started singing backup vocals, and we called ourselves White Sun. So there used to be videos available on YouTube of this. I think they've since been taken down. Maybe I could find some, but yeah, so we performed all these like little whatever, like just little concerts, mini concerts, meditations at Burning Man. Then we went on to do, I think it was Bhakti Fest, out at Joshua Tree. That's always in the beginning of September. And I think there was a couple other festivals that we did. And then we did like a performance at Yoga West. There was another girl named Teresa who was going by Sangeeta, who's a very, very, very talented and award-winning. She's a classical, like opera, classical singer, artist. Anyway, we were then going to do the what is the Spirit Voyage Festival? I can't think of the name of it. The Spirit Voyage
Fest.
Satnam Fest. We were going to do Satnam Fest East, and I actually was back in Virginia visiting my family at the time, and I get a message from, I think it was Anthony, saying, hey, we're not going to have you perform with us at Satnam Fest, even though I had been planning on it. So I was kind of cut from the group, and so was Teresa. And so at this point, it was just Simrit, Gurjas, Anthony, and Harjiwan. Now, at the time, Harjiwan had, his wife had left him. His wife, Erin, at the time had left him. I'm not going to surmise for what reasons, but he was always very flirtatious with his students, including myself. He would stare at me for long periods, and I would see him staring at me. He would say things to me like, "You're the prettiest girl in the room. You have all the brains and all the beauty," like these very like complimentary, it felt a little creepy, but he was kind of a little creepy, I guess. But I was used to being hit on, I was an actress and a model, and I was in my 20s, and I was just sort of used to it on a certain level. So I just kind of brushed it off. I was like, he's just, this old dude, whatever. And now he's single. His wife left him. Um, he was having Simrit spend more and more and more and more time with him around this time. And I found out later that he was having her come down and stay at his apartment, come down from Grass Valley, leaving her husband and son in Grass Valley and come stay with him. And he also, was telling her that she needed to split from her husband, Jai Dave. What the reasons were, what the, any of it, who knows. But she was spending the night at Hari Jiwan's apartment and attending all these teacher trainings and, now doing this White Sun operation with them. And Jai Dave came down for one of the teacher trainings that Simrit was, performing music at one of the weekends. And all I know is that they stormed out, like in the middle, they just left, like very quietly, but they were gone. And I remember asking one of her G1 students, like, what happened? And he was like, what do you think happened? I was like, I don't know. I was naive. Like I didn't get it, but then I did. RG1 was trying to end their marriage and begin a relationship with Simrit.
Wow.
I know she hasn't been public about this. However, there are several forums in which, it has been made, people have talked about it. So I feel comfortable saying that.
And
anyway.
I also want to say that it also is illuminating a very, very historical pattern and on repeat that Arjun was setting up with his earliest students. And for us to hear this is very important because the silent nature of it is how it perpetuates and carries on with new spawns of teachers doing the exact same formula that YB did with his students and his followers. And so by speaking to it, it's more than just naming their story. And maybe one day they will tell it in a public way outside of written stasis. But thank you for that. And so keep going.
And absolutely. So Simrit's now gone. Harjiwan and Gurjas take this White Sun, name, and now they're running with it. One of Harjiwan's longtime students, a woman who took the name Santosh, her husband, who was not a Kundalini student, they had actually been married before she had found the yoga community, and she was a fanatic. She was a Harjiwan fanatic. She still is. So her husband had won many, many, many awards in the industry as a music producer. Very talented. That's his career. So, of course, Gurjas and Harjiwan are aware of this. And Gurjas sends, a small clip of herself singing, because she's now dabbling in singing. She'd been doing this thing with the White Sun stuff, to Santosh. And, Harjiwan had, really encouraged Gurjas to learn Gurmukhi, to, learn the Banis, to learn all of the teachings, to sort of an nth degree. And, the way that she would pronounce the Gurmukhi was pretty good. She could read it pretty well. And she knew this stuff, and she knew, what the general sort of spiritual meanings were of, these Banis and things. And I mean, she was knowledgeable. And so Harjiwan was like, you are the channel now. You are this new modern channel for this sound current. And so she sends a track to Santosh. She's like, oh, this is pretty good. And then, plays it for her husband. And then, because at the suggestion of Gurjas and Harjiwan, like maybe we can do a collaboration. So that's how White Sun, as we kind of know it now, kind of was born. And, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I do know that, I think that Adam Berry, that is Santosh's husband, the award-winning music producer, recognized that this was an avenue within which, he could go down to be part of the community that his wife was a part of. Because he didn't attend the events and things like that, the teacher trainings and the works. I don't think it resonated with him, but now he had a way to be closer to his wife. And Tej and Harjiwan were saying, this is great. Now you guys can, make your relationship deeper and closer. And so Santosh doesn't, work. She was a housewife, aside from, I think she'd had a career in modeling prior to marrying Adam. But, Adam was very successful. They had a nice home in a very nice neighborhood in Los Angeles. They clearly, had a good amount of money. And so she didn't work. She wasn't a career woman. So she's got all this time to devote to Hari Jiwan, but also whatever endeavors that they're pursuing. So, yeah. So
Just in that note, it's also part of the formula to surround yourself with people that have extra wealth, right? YB really taught this well, right? To find out how people can best serve. Are they the person you platform? Are they a person that has money and resources? Are they connection? Are they an open doors person? And watching how this formula morphs um into how it plays out in a whole nother spawn of specialness and inner circleness.
and also at this time, the Rama Institute had already started. Tej, had sort of gotten her more permanent location for her Nine Treasures operation. So she, was doing that. I was doing Seva for her at the time there.
So she has not, sorry. So Tej is Nine Treasures.
Mhm.
Golden Bridge was Golden Bridge. And then, just so that everyone's caught up, then Hari Jiwan along with Gurjas and Gurjugget, right? Start
Mhm.
Rama,
Mhm.
right? So now Tej does come a part of Rama too, but she also has her own Nine Treasures kind of system and following, but she's definitely a part of the Rama group too.
Yeah, so Rama is Guru Jagat's studio, which was started with a loan from Kundalini Katie's mother. And she starts this yoga studio, and Tej and Hari Jiwan are teachers there at the
Got it.
studio, as well
Gotcha.
as Gurjas. And anyway, and I think there was actually a White Sun, kind of concert thing. I remember I sang and did some chanting with one of Guru Jagat, Katie's early classes at Rama. There's pictures of me like on the little stage with her. So I was part of that,
Movement.
world socially, and all the classes and everything. Anyway, Santosh at the time, the reason I know this is because she had me sub for her classes that were being taught at a studio in the Valley, that she had regular classes a couple times a week. And she asked me to sub for them because she was going to be out of town. She was out of town. She was going around the country, and she was, essentially going to various events and, whining and dining, literally like taking out various members of the academy, the recording academy, and saying, this is our CD. She's in that costume, she's in the full costume, the flowing chuni, the beautiful kunda pin, whatever, the beautiful jewelry. She's a very tall, she had a modeling career, so she's a symmetrical face, like a very lovely lady. She's got this whole persona. It's all white. The album's called White Sun, White Sun. This is pretty easy to remember. I mean, like you get it
And
one.
what year is this? What year is this?
It was whatever the year was that they won the Grammy. So
I was
must have
thinking
been
that was much later, more like 2015 or
2016.
16. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
We could,
Yeah.
I could Google it, but
Yeah, exactly.
anyway,
Yeah.
so
So just keep going on in terms of like your story and what propels you. So here you are quite enmeshed with
yeah,
Rama and Golden Bridge and
and
Nine
Golden Bridge,
Treasures, all
and
the three of and the
and the
Gurdwara.
Gurdwara, and now White Tantric. I'm getting involved with White Tantric yoga as both the Sevadar, but then I managed to kind of come in as an employee. But that's another tangent. I just want to finish this thing about Santosh going around and
Oh,
kind of
sure.
marketing their album, the White Sun album, even though she was not part of the album. I mean, she's not making any of the music. She's not on it. Her picture is not anywhere. Like this, none of the vocals are her. She's got no part of it. She is this face of it. And, for her husband, Adam Berry, who is the member of the Recording Academy. And, they're going around and literally interfacing with as many individuals that are, part of the Recording Academy as possible, essentially lobbying their album. I mean, this is the politics of entertainment industry. You get your name out there, And then furthermore, at this time, Instagram is taking off. Instagram is, very instrumental in the rise of Guru Jagat and White Sun, I have to say. Without Instagram, that was their platform. And initially there was the hashtag thing with the algorithm. They were writing the algorithm in that all of that inner circle of Harijiwan would use the same hashtags and repost the same posts that they would make marketing, White Sun and Harijiwan's workshops and classes and Guru Jagat and Rama and all of that. But particularly the White Sun tracks, that you could play the track and have a cool image or video under it, and with certain hashtags. So like if you would look at a certain hashtag, there'd be like 25 reposts of the same post. So I noticed that this was happening. And then they would they would say, oh look, we're number one on such and such a chart. Well, what was happening, they were in their workshops and teachers trainings, they were having the students, play these tracks off the internet, off Spotify or whatever, on repeat in the four corners of your dwelling place, chanting, listening to, because this is going to, make you wealthy. This is going to bring you your soulmate. This is going to, the same thing. The same teaching. So, yes, it's going to get a million plays immediately because everybody's got it on repeat.
Right. Exactly. And creating this viral, using the viral aspect to get that all on repeat.
I just have to say, I recognize this because I am a member of the Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA, and I have to vote. I have to vote every award season, and we get a ballot. And on the ballot, there are, all kinds of, films and television shows, and, all kinds of actors and teams of actors and stuff. And have I seen every single one of those productions? No, I don't have time to watch all of them. And generally, when I go through that ballot, I vote for who I recognize and who I like. Like Tina Fey, I'm voting for her. Yeah, I love that producer. I'm voting for him. Oh yeah, that was a fun movie. I didn't see the other four, but I know I like that one, so I'm voting for that one. So all I'm saying is, I think this was very easy. People are like, how on earth did White Sun beat Enya? Well, okay, if you're a member of the Recording Academy, you've gotten this personal, like, we have, this musician on the album, someone personally telling you how great, the production value is on this album, who has contributed to the album. You're remembering this person in this very unique costume, the very unique mannerism. It's called White Sun. White Sun, White Sun. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that lady in all white. Oh yeah. She was so nice. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. And they said they have this Cora player on it. This guy who, came from West Africa, whatever. Cool. Voting for that.
Yeah. Just the lead in thinking and how formulaic that is too.
But that's very, very, very typical in the entertainment industry. So someone in the entertainment industry would recognize this. And I do have to also say that, when Sonatum was nominated, I know that Spirit Voyage did not do any of that kind of lobbying. They didn't do any of that kind of interfacing and marketing, as it were. So she was out there all on her own, so it's
said.
Never about talent per se. It's about who you know and who knows you.
Right.
Oh.
And it sounds like Harijiwan has quite the playbook on that, in terms of how he strategically, made whatever moves he did to put himself in the posture and the position. Because for those of you that don't know, in 2020, him and Rama and the whole, they came out with that horrible Flow of Fate video that was the propaganda video against
Flow of Fate or whatever.
It was just horrible. And it reminded me of like 1984 propaganda that I remember in every gurdwara or every lecture. And you're a kid absorbing propaganda, so you don't know it's propaganda. You just know it's off. And that's what that video felt like. But I'm pointing that out because the formulas you're hearing, like what Jules is pointing out here, is like, these are, how how he's surrounding himself with people of importance and prominence, with different resources accessible. He's already making moves early before the establishment of Rama to marrying people, pushing people to divorce, having private relationships with his own students. And again, for those of you that don't know, he was married to Tej. And then by this time, he's obviously created some sort of a partnership.
Oh yeah, so like Tej had divorced. This was around
they had divorced early in the 90s, but later on created this teacher capacity. So and he starts creating the following around him, and Tej is still there. And then he ends up marrying his own student and then marrying another student. So I don't really want you to tell us all the stories of his weird complexity, but I do want you to bring us, because we're going to get to some of those details. I want you to bring us to, so you're taking all this in during these years of your most devoted commitment, I guess is what I'm getting at. You're teaching, you're saving, you're hearing this interesting like faction happening. Golden Bridge is also yours. And it's not even close to 2018, which is where I'm going here, is because it's 2013-ish. So
I know.
what more do we want to fill in? Because by 2018-ish, you start waking up, and then 2020, it all breaks open. So I really want you to be able to hone in on the parts that you want to highlight specific to
Yeah.
your story.
And we
Because
might need to do a part 2 here, but I know I'm very
and
long-winded.
but it's okay because you're illuminating aspects to how these things go on such a potent repeat, and elements to stories I've never heard. So I'm guessing most listeners haven't heard. So let's not speed it up. Let's just get as much as we want and then keep going. And we can always do a part 2, no problem.
Okay, so what I'm going to say next, the reason I'm saying it is because it is integral to my story in a way. So yes, Harjiwan had married one of his students, this gal named Erin, and then she left him in 2013. She was instrumental in helping him to build his original teacher trainings, which were on the west side of Los Angeles, and was part of that original sort of group of following that he had. Harjiwan married several of his students together. And the way he did this was by, having counseling sessions with them and sort of, telling them, like I was saying, that marriage is sort of the highest level of yoga. And, you want to take this to the next level, why don't you marry this person? And then saying to the other person, why don't you marry this person? Really setting these marriages up. So there's this very core group that's around him that's sort of developing off into their own thing. Then they have, by the time this whole Rama Nine Treasures thing has come about, White Sun, and Tasia's playing the White Sun tracks in her classes. Harjiwan's playing them in his classes. Then this Grammy seems to come out of nowhere. Several of their students were Emmy Award winners, so that's why I was thinking of that. But this Grammy almost seems to come out of nowhere, but then that gives them this huge sort of platform upon which to, say, look, like we're tops, like we are this exclusive, we are this whole thing. In these years, Harjiwan is dating his students. For example, one of his students who I was friends with, she had newly moved to Los Angeles, and she discovered the yoga sort of on accident. I think she kind of, ran into them, and she's a very lovely, lovely lady. And a lot of these students, were very beautiful young women, I have to say, a lot of them. And, Harjiwan was, I think, instantly, recognized in this person, a seeker and somebody who, could be kind of taken in and part of the group. And she was beautiful. And so she started attending the workshops and the classes and the stuff at Rama. And he was, offering to give her a ride home and, give her a ride to the workshop and this and that. And then, they were, going to different events together. And then he, was holding her hand and calling her baby and, really getting very, very close physically to her. And she remembered being very uncomfortable. And then she kind of cut that off. And then he, got very cold with her and kind of made her time, every time she would show up at Rama, miserable. And then I think there was definitely like gossip going around because Guru Jagat started acting differently with her. And anyway, all this to be, just as an example of one of the students that he was definitely hitting on, and like I said, myself included. I remember at one winter solstice, I was walking across the, where the baseball field is from the tenting camping area, like across into the entrance. And, this is what, 7:30 in the morning. And I can just feel somebody looking at me, like it just, you have that feeling sometimes. I was like, this is weird. And I'm just like walking along, like ready to have my day of tantric, and I look up and I see him just like staring at me, like with this like weird, like this gaze that's like this very deliberate. I don't even know. And I was just like, that's kind of uncomfortable, But I think he would do this with students, and then there was a student, Amanda Chantal Bacon, who founded Moon Juice, which, now it's been revealed in insider articles and podcasts. And I think maybe, I don't know if Vice did a piece on them, but anyway, a lot has been revealed about her and her practices and the racism and the abuse of employees. This whole same story, similar to Rama. She was friends with Guru Jagat. She shared a hotel room with Hari Jiwan on one of their, India yatras. So, and they did white tantric yoga together, and he was doing white tantric yoga with several of his students. All this to say, one of his students, named Mundev, he was doing weekly counseling sessions with. He had married her to her husband, Nirbo, in 2010. That was one of the arranged marriages. He said, you marry him, you marry her, put them together. They had a wedding. You can watch it. It's on the internet. If you Google it. They're bowing at his feet in the ceremony. Literally, they have their forehead on the ground at his feet, which is, I'm not going to judge it, but that did happen.
Wacky. I'll say it's absolutely lunatic, but go ahead.
Anyway, so I think probably around 2015, Harjuman convinces her, because she had been doing more and more and more and more seva for him, for Harjuman, for his teacher trainings, for these traveling teacher trainings that he was now doing in Eastern Europe and Russia and Western Europe as well. Saying you need to come along with us, this is your destiny, blah, blah, blah. And so she's taking more time off work. He's saying you need to, work more with the teachings, do more with us. She is. And then, basically tells her, you need to quit your job, come work for us full time, work, seva. So she does. And she was making a good salary doing the work that she had been doing, which it was my understanding it was like PR for various companies. A couple airline companies included. Anyway, so she's no longer working in like a corporate capacity, and she's now with him full time and traveling with him. And so after a particularly long kind of like teacher training travel, I think this was 2016 now. She comes back after a few months and serves her husband, this man who was named Nirbo, divorce papers.
Wow.
And so, who knows when their relationship started, but, at some point they had developed a romantic, physical, intimate relationship, Harjuman and Mundev.
Right.
And their divorce, Nirbo and Mundev's divorce was finalized, the beginning of January 2017, and not maybe 6 weeks later, it was announced on Instagram that Harjuman and Mundev had been married at some point, because Guru Joss made a post, congratulations on your marriage. Monday.
Oh my Lord. That is just, it's so strange.
So the bottom line is he was sleeping with his student at some point, and she was living with him after the divorce. I remember asking her, where are you living now? Because I went to a class at Rama, and she was like, with Guru Joss. And I was like, but Guru Joss just had a baby. She's got an infant. They live in a small 1-bedroom apartment, her husband, this child. I'm like, it doesn't seem like, and there was something in the way she said it that didn't seem right. She was living with Harjuman, but mind you, she had been spending more and more and more time. I mean, late night hours doing seva at Harjuman's apartment for many months prior to this, cooking for him, cleaning for him, doing his laundry, like all this while she was still married to this other yoga student. And Harjuman was having her, text Harjuman, every blow by blow with her relationship, with that man named Nirbo, with that guy, that other yoga student. Time like texting Harjuman, tell me when you guys are getting intimate, tell me when you're doing this, that, and I mean, just really.
Yeah.
Again, how do we judge this? I don't know, we don't.
Well, you judge it as the predatory formula that it is, because what I hear when I hear this is I hear my parents' generation being victimized with that same level of control and power manipulation by YB. and he married people, divorced people, he stole other people's wives, he sent their children away, he controlled all these aspects. And to hear how Hari Jiwan has been systematically resetting that up within his own system, and with new fresh meat, so to speak, new fresh flesh, new fresh minds, new fresh hearts. And it's why speaking out loud about it is so essential, because it helps to speak to the formula that's on play. I hope that second gen and first gen hearing this hear what's really being on display, because Jules started in 2011, so we're talking about decades later that you might have left and you might have realized this stuff is full of hypocrisy. And yet this predatory formula is on full display current right now, with the same exact tactics that feel just as nostalgic and just as aligned and just as spiritually connected as you might have felt it in the 70s. Or as, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember like, first gens kind of like saying to me in those first years that I went to Espanola, being like, "Oh, so you're a Hari Jiwan student, he's kind of like a little Yogi Bhajan, he's got his secretaries, doesn't he? Following after him and doing all this seva for him." And I was like, yeah, yeah, not understanding at the time. I remember, so it was Solstice 2016 during White Tantric Yoga, and I ran into, Monday, and I was like, "Where's your husband?" And she's like, "Oh, well, you know what? You're the first person I'm going to tell. So we're getting a divorce." And she's doing tantric with Hari Jiwan.
How interesting.
So
And
anyway,
for those of you that don't know, she's the one who made the movie, The Flow of Fate. So a lot of the video production and all this seva is her work. And
and
she is his
doing,
wife now.
yeah, is his wife doing, all this teaching for them and for Rama. And I guess, kind of like quote unquote carrying the Guru Jagat torch, and, they're marketing her as this
The next
thing,
prodigy, the
next-
next
yeah,
prodigy. So, look out
the
for the
formula.
next Oracle code download trip that you can be a part of.
So okay, so I remember I was driving up Highland Avenue in Los Angeles, and my phone dinged, and it was a text from a friend who had moved back to Australia, who was in the Kundalini Yoga community. It was also a teacher, a Tej student, and the text was a screenshot of that post on Instagram of the Monday of Hari Jiwan marriage. And I was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what?" Like, she just got divorced. Like, oh no, oh no, and that was kind of like the first. I was like, I don't think I can attend any more of their events now. This is now 2017. I think I tried to attend a couple more classes, but there was such a sour taste in my mouth, and it felt so odd that he was, because she was, I think she's a couple years younger than me. And so, kind of like putting myself, because I had wanted to be married to another yoga student like she had been. I looked to them as, as the couple that I wanted to be part of. Like, I wish I had somebody to go to Solstice with and camp with, and, get, have a yoga Sikh wedding with, and, try to be having kids with, all of it. Right. And, but then to like be putting myself in those shoes of somebody who was sleeping with Hari Jiwan, who, is at least about 30 years older than me. I don't know. It just didn't.
Cringe
No!
worthy. Cringe.
Oh, that's your teacher.
It's
No,
old man uncle
power
stuff.
differential. Like, no, 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 no. So that was kind of like the beginning for me. Now, we may have to do a part 2 because I'm gonna have to go pretty soon. But I had 2 panic attacks at the end of 2016. One was around the election. That was when Trump was elected. And then I had one at winter solstice 2016 when I was the manager of the SSS cabin, which I did for several years. So doing all that white tantric seva, which again, I'm happy to talk a lot more about that maybe in another conversation. There's a lot there too. But so I had 2 panic attacks and I went out of body both times, and I had not had a panic attack like that before. I got on the internet, I figured out that I'd had a panic attack, and, I knew enough to be like, "This isn't right, something's wrong." But I also, I was told, like, don't go see a doctor, don't go see doctors, don't go see a psychiatrist, don't go see your family. You don't spend time with your family more than, I think it was what, 2, 3 days with your family. You're going to revert to your old patterns, was what Hari G1 always, taught us. So I just got on the internet, how to stop panic attacks. And I found these Stanford microdosing studies where they were using LSD and psilocybin
Yeah.
in micro doses in a regimen that was 6 weeks long, twice a week for 6 weeks, with journaling and intentionality to, enact changes, mental, emotional changes. And that this had dramatically reduced panic attacks for people as part of their studies. And so I was like, oh my God, this is the answer. I remember doing, mushrooms when I was 20 and, having a very interesting experience. But microdosing, that's not a trip. That's not gonna like, I'm not like changing. I'm not, you know,
Yeah.
that's acceptable. I was open to that.
Yeah.
Found a friend who I knew was sort of in that plant medicine world. She gave me some mushrooms, told me all about microdosing, and I did it because 6 weeks, 40 days. This is a new 40-day, sadhana for me. And that's how I looked at it. I did it with yoga, meditation, journaling. It shifted things just enough for me that all of a sudden it's like the door just opened and there's a little bit of light coming through.
Mm.
Because at the time I felt, the only way I can explain it is it was like I was in the corner of like at the ceiling, like there's a wall here, there's a wall here, and there's a ceiling here. And I'm butting my head in that corner and I've got nowhere to move. There's nowhere for me to go. I felt really trapped in my life at the end of 2016. And this is when my whole existence was 3HO, Kundalini, Rama, all of it.
Solstice every year. Did you go to winter
Solstice.
solstice too, or just summer?
Yeah, winter, summer, running
Winter.
the SSS cabin, now doing all this seva for White Tantric Yoga, working for White Tantric Yoga.
At the solstices as well as in LA?
Yes. So
Got
I
it.
did
So,
the
yeah.
marketing and some of the admin for White Tantric Yoga LA, which, we had twice a year. And I did that for several years.
How interesting. Whoa. So this kind of like step in a new direction kind of slowly starts opening it for you to start seeing things a little bit more clearly. You're obviously still in the world for another 2 more years fully before you start
So
moving away. Yeah.
it's also in 2016 that I was teaching a yoga class at UCLA, and I then had a flight to get on a flight to Santa Fe after this because I was going to be leading the sadhana at summer solstice the next morning. One of the first morning sadhanas. This was like the Thursday, the first day of solstice. And I was supposed to be leading the sadhana. The traffic was so horrible in West LA, and I had that huge suitcase of all my camping gear. There's a cutoff for the luggage at LAX, and it was either 45 or 60 minutes at the time. And I just barely missed the cutoff to check my bag. So they wouldn't allow me on the flight. So I said, you have to book yourself on another flight. The only other flight that night to Albuquerque was actually on Southwest. So I got a refund from American Airlines. They were very kind to me. And then I just booked myself on this Southwest flight. And I'm waiting in line because you line up because there's no assigned seats on Southwest. And I didn't have a turban on, but I had a little white bandana tied in a bow. And I was probably wearing a white top and maybe gray pants or something. And this little lady comes up to me and she goes, "You're going to Solstice, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so we started talking, and then she's like, "Can I sit next to you?" And so we sat next to each other on the flight. Turns out she was one of Yogi Bhajan's original secretaries and had joined him in 1969. She left in 2004 when he died, and she had not been back to see anyone in the community since. And it's now 2016. It might have been 2015. It was either 2015 or 2016. I think it was from 2016. Anyway, we shared that flight together and we shared contact information and we stayed in touch. And so she
Wow.
then in 2018 invited me to go visit her. And she said, my friend is here. I want you to meet my friend, Pamela Dyson.
What?
And
So the person you met in the airport was an early secretary that then later introduced you to Pamela Dyson.
yes. So I went to visit her. I was doing a video production job for her. She, actually paid for my airfare to come, the woman I had met, the former secretary. And so she introduced me to Pamela, and Pamela was like,
That person was in still, not in, kind of
no,
neutral
they
about
had
it
been
all.
out for, yeah, neutral, very neutral. She's still very neutral about everything. She had made her peace with, having been a secretary and having been involved with Yogi Bhajan, all those years. She had done a lot of work on herself, and she was cool.
Got it.
She just
Okay.
kind
So
of was back.
but introduces you to Pamela in 2018.
Introduces me to Pamela. This is spring 2018. And Pamela's like, I've been working on this manuscript, and you're somebody who's in the Kundalini yoga world. Will you read this and give me your feedback?
Oh my God.
So at that time, I was involved in a romantic relationship with that former student of Hari G1's, who had been married to Monday.
Near Bo.
Yes. And so he and I had been sharing stories about, I was sharing stories about what, I had gone through with Tej, and he was sharing stories about what he'd gone through with Hari G1 and beyond, and what it was like to be part of that inner circle and all the weird, wacky stuff that they did and talked about. And I was shocked. And I think he was kind of shocked to hear about, what I had endured with Tej. And I think it was becoming very clear to both of us that something was not none of this was right. None of this was good. None of this was. And then when I read Pamela's manuscript and was speaking with both her and this other former secretary and hearing all their stories and hearing about, how they had lots and lots of sex with Yogi Bhajan and how they had lots of group sex and, how all these things had gone down and how it was a whole system and how Yogi Bhajan would have them have sex with each other. And I mean, I was pretty shocked, and I remember telling that man who I was involved with romantically at the time um, about it, and I think both of us were just really shocked. But that was the bubble bursting for us. And
2018. And building up to this, were you wearing a turban daily or were you just wearing it when you taught?
just wearing it when I taught, but I always had on, like, I like to wear headbands a lot. I
So
was
you
still
generally lived the lifestyle of being in the community.
Yeah, I mean, I was sober. I was plant-based, pretty much mostly vegan, and yeah, I did the yoga and meditation on an almost daily basis.
And mostly wearing white, but kind of in your
Mostly
own
wearing white.
way and kind of covering your head in your way. And so building up to this, 2018, now it starts to unravel and you are fully teaching at this time though.
I was still teaching, yes, only at UCLA.
Got it. Got it. So no longer at the studios.
No,
Whoa, what a bubble burster. You get connected to somebody who then leads you to Pamela before the book even comes out in 2020. So this all happens for you in 2018. But
yeah, and I
then
have to say
obviously,
that,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
and that man and I, we kind of like left together.
Okay.
I think it was, it was a stepwise thing for both of us. I think he more dramatically and drastically kind of, I mean, obviously, I think he went through a very, almost a much larger trauma, having been all indoctrinated with Harjiwan and that whole scene, and
And
having
being
his wife
married.
be taken by his teacher, and so that's just on a whole other level that I had not experienced any of that myself. Although I had experienced a very large amount of emotional abuse working for Tej all those years, which I haven't even touched upon yet. And I
Yeah,
do have
and I was gonna say, like, it's okay because I feel like you brought us to this kind of bubble bursting point, which is a really wonderful landing place for your personal story. And I think it would be wonderful to have you back and we could really go into kind of like more of the details of specific things in relation to some of these teachers and your formulaic process because you have such language around it. You've done a lot of reflection and deconstructing around it. So to kind of have one whole episode where we're just honing in on those things as opposed to you needing to tell the story to catch us up may be really good for listeners.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it gives you an idea of, yeah, I mean, how somebody could get in such a fanatic and sort of, like I said, like that fast track that I took in. It did have a lot to do though with those Los Angeles teachers and sort of what they had built and what they were doing. And then how, I sort of saw this very, dark and awful side of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And the schism between the teachers and the leaving Golden Bridge, and just how it was all about money and power, and then sex in there too now. And it just yeah I mean, and it was a lot of trauma, and the amount of grief that I have had to process surrounding all of it, as we all have, was, I mean, it's been very immense these last few years. But as you say, I did sort of have a head start in reading Pamela's manuscript, basically 2 years ahead of others.
So
Um,
then what in 2020, when you saw the floodgate of stories and second gen stories, and then like the AOB report and like all these particular things, that must have just like compounded interest of everything you had started to unwind from 2018 to 2020.
Well, I mean, it was a lot of like, I knew it. I told you so. Like, well, here it is. But that's when I started to do podcasts and speak with journalists in 2020, because I kind of already,
You had
I'd sort
voice
of
to
already
it.
done that kind of, amount of groundwork to
Yeah.
to say, and recognize this is a system of control, this is a cult, this was abusive, I lost years of my life. And I think there was a fuel to my fire, so much anger that, I had been feeling, um, particularly regarding the years lost and the energy that I could have been putting toward a career or a relationship, with somebody who I could have begun a family with. Um, and it's personal, but I did find out in 2020 that my fertility is pretty non existent at this point. I'm 40 years old. It's pretty typical for women in their 40s to have very low fertility. Mine was particularly low, I think, kind of to begin with. But, having to kind of, I don't want to blame the group, but, I did lose 8 years of my life that maybe could have gone in another direction. And these are years where I did have fertility, and I did have, a winsomeness and an amount of, enthusiasm towards life and working and being part of something. I could have put that towards a relationship or a career. None of
Yeah.
that's to say that I still don't have a lot of life ahead of me and that I can't build whatever I want. But there's been a lot of grief
Grief.
around that. And I'm not somebody who is in for 20 years. I'm not somebody who was second generation born in, so I don't even know what that's like. But I do know that the amount of grief that I've had with even my involvement has just been immense.
Astronomical. And while I do know we'll have another conversation, and I'd really like to highlight some of the predatory formulas specifically of Nine Treasures and what you experienced with your teacher Tej. I want to say that what we got to in this session, in this conversation together, has been so brilliant in that the time period you're talking about and the teachers and the LA scene, it's really, really an important illumination that you brought forth in your own experience, um, to see how these early programs that got started in the 70s and carried on in the 80s and in the 90s are in full effect by the time you're in 2011, and then now still in full effect. So for those of you that really need to hear this, Gurmukh was one of the teachers that kind of had a real bypassing response to all of this. And then, the Rama group was and added that was on steroids. They kind of went on attack, and that's when they kind of seceded from KRI, which you heard through Jill's story was seed planted years earlier before the actual official break. So, these formulas of predatory patterns, there's so much to what you shared today, Jules. And I know a lot of people are going to hear themselves in your story from this every decade, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. And it is tremendously sad. That's my experience in hearing it, is because there's not enough of these voices out yet. By the time 2011 hits, these systems get full on us flurried in. And I see how and why, like you're committed to your well-being and your own growth. And so for you to share your story in this way, um, and the ways that you were fully in and committed and devoted, and simultaneously kind of watching things go down and kind of like, that's a little strange. That's a little weird. So it's like a buildup. And until you realize, oh, this is so off, right? And then that book. And so just like, wow, wow.
Yeah. And again, as we said, there's so much more that I could talk about. And I do want to touch upon at some point sort of I mean, I did talk about how like I recognized that I sort of had the mother issue thing, and then, kind of taking Tage on as this sort of replacement in that sort of hole in my psyche. But there was an awful lot of, as I said, emotional abuse that went along with that, and a lot of indoctrination that went along with her group. And
Yes.
nobody has really spoken about any of that yet. So
Yes. So
maybe
we're gonna
that'll
do a
get to be
whole, we're gonna
continued.
do a whole episode just focused on that, because when you do start listening to Jules and all the voice that she's brought to this conversation the last 2 years, not just this one, but on all the other platforms over the last couple of years, you know that she's got some dirty details in so many places. And this is so, and it's not to make it sound bad. It's wonderful, because when somebody like you can speak to put some light into the dark corners of things that are in full play, whether it's, at this ashram or at this gurdwara or at this studio or with this particular teacher, especially when those systems are still playing out, it only helps kind of create a disruption when somebody is ready to really listen to it and see themselves in our own story. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
So we won't even try to fill in some of these manipulative stories. We're going to actually have another whole episode where we get to go into those spaces, because I can't wait for you all to hear some more of these stories. You won't even believe some of my eyes popping out when you told me some of the things when we
And
were
I
talking
do
about
want to make a
one.
disclaimer, and we kind of talked about this, you and I, Ganeshan, prior to recording. I feel okay and safe talking about these people, even though some of the stories are not necessarily my own, because I did bear witness to them and they did deeply affect me. And I know that some of these people have not come forward publicly, and they are their stories to tell and fill in details of, or not. And that's okay too. But I do think it's integral to understanding the sort of level of, horrendous abuse that was going on. So
Yeah, and the convolution of it, the ongoing manipulative convolution that literally starts to get you to gaslight yourself. Like, did I just see what I saw? Is that really what's happening? Because it's so contradictory to kind of some of the essence that we're getting through the practices themselves. And this makes it extra confusing and convoluted, which is why giving details in the way that Jules is able to, and why we'll have a whole nother episode, is so brilliant. Because what it does is it pokes the hole in the illusion, so that if that was your teacher, you get to say, yeah, you don't have a lineage that's clean. Sorry, nope. This spawns off and new spores are created in new predatory formulas that didn't even always intend to be predatory. But if we're not speaking to the things in plain sight, then the secrecy and the shame and the patterns get to continue, because we're not calling them out for what they are. So I appreciate your bravery. I appreciate you illuminating your story to me. I never knew your full story. It's brilliant. And I look forward to our next conversation with even more stories, because some of the convoluted stories have happened to you. I know you've listened to other people listening, and we're only going to keep highlighting them. What's the last words for listeners here before we wrap this episode up?
Mm. uh, this is a process. And I think that even though the sort of main fire that has swept through at this point, we're still we're still in it. And, we are still working through these things. And yeah, it's all okay.
It is. Wherever you're at in your process is just okay. And we hold space for your story, even if it's never told. So thank you for listening. Tell us about your song.
Okay, so this song, I really love the artist Maggie Rogers. She's almost like a spirit animal to me. She taps in, she gets it. And this song was released on her most recent album this summer, and it's called Begging for Rain. It reminds me, even the title, a little bit of Meta Loche,
Mm,
the chatrik bird waiting for rain. And there's a few lines in it that always really spoke to me. Um, one of them is, I do my best to not be bitter, give my rage a babysitter, still waiting for the adults to come home.
mm, mm.
And then I'm cutting holes in all the pockets of everyone who's calling me insane.
Well said.
Waiting for rain. Yeah.
Waiting for rain. All right, folks. Well, we don't listen to the whole clip, but you can go to the Uncomfortable Conversations playlist on Spotify and listen to the whole clip for copyright purposes. But let's listen in here for a little bit and begging for rain.
There's also a little harmonium in there.
The more you wait, the more you break, the longer that it takes to undo. All the knots that you've been tying on cherry stems and blackboard wire too. You work all day to find religion and end up standing in your kitchen, wondering about the way it's always been. I'm a firefighter and I can't stop it. They fan the flames higher than rockets and leave you standing on.
Thank you for that. Please listen to those words. That was beautiful. And we only got started. Folks, I want to say thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. I want to thank you, Jules Hartley, for bringing all of yourself and your vulnerability and your stories. And I know we're just getting started. Thank you also for your donations to the podcast. Your support is always greatly appreciated. If you want to make a one-time or ongoing donation, you can do that at gurunishan.com/uncomfortable conversations. And please also, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, please send me an email at gn@gurunishan.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for your listening support, you all. Talk to you soon.